But yeah, aloha mai kako. Welcome everyone. This is our Pilina Panel organized by Honua Scholars. My name is Nakoa Ferrant. I will be moderating tonight's panel discussion. In case this is your first Honua Scholars event, I just want to briefly kind of describe what our organization does. Honua Scholars was started in the fall of 2020, and its primary mission is to highlight Native Hawaiian value-based STEM practices to try to inspire individuals from any background to develop connections between their culture, community, and career. And through our events and mentorship programs, we aim to increase the overall interest in STEM in Hawaii and provide the tools and guidance, as well as opportunities for individuals with connections to Hawaii to succeed in their respective fields. Before getting too far along, we'd like to thank our generous funding sponsors for help to make events like this possible. Those include the Pacific American Foundation, the Hawaii People's Fund, which is another great local community partner, as well as the Stanford University Vice Provost for Graduate Education's Diversity Innovation Fund. Thank you to all those organizations for the ongoing support that help to make these events possible. So maybe you were able to attend some of our earlier events, virtual seminars earlier this year. They've included talk story sessions with current graduate students from a variety of STEM and medical fields, talking about their paths to graduate school. Our second event covered questions about how to apply to graduate school and get funding. And today's Pilina panel will dive deeper into how you can develop your network during college to get research experiences that can strengthen your resume for graduate school or a variety of other STEM careers. So we've prepared a few questions to get the conversation going, but please feel free to start adding questions to the Q&A box throughout the course of this seminar, and we'll try to get to all of your different questions, either through live response or maybe directly in the chat response. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our panel for this event. First, we have Thomas Lee, who's a PhD student in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at Harvard University. Next, we have Andy Conching, who's a current first-year medical student at the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. Nathan Lee is a second-year medical student at Weill Cornell Medical College in New York City. And last but certainly not least, we have Professor Mihana Vaughn from the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I want to thank, on behalf of all attendees and definitely our organization, all these panelists for agreeing to participate in tonight's event and providing their great insight into how to develop their networks. And so with that, let's get the conversation going. And we'll start by just having each panelist share a little bit more about themselves so you can get a better understanding of who they are, their research and hobbies, and then we'll kind of dig deeper into the meat of tonight's discussion related to network development. So I'll hand it off to Thomas Lee to talk a little bit about how he's got to where he is today.
Muted. Hi everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Thomas. I'm a third-year PhD student in geosciences or geophysics. So I work on generally things to do with earthquakes and volcanism and other weird stuff where the ground shakes. I graduated from Harvard as an undergraduate in 2019. I'm originally from Hilo, graduated from Wekia High in 2015. And as far as things outside of work that I like to do, there's always music and reading that you can do on the mainland. And I've been trying to figure out how to fish out here on the East Coast, even though it's definitely not the same as Big Island.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas, for sharing. Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy. As Nakoa said, I'm a first-year medical student at JABSM. Back at home, I grew up here in Manoa. Graduated from Kamehameha schools, then went to do my undergrad, got my BA in neuroscience at Dartmouth College, and then worked a little bit out there doing research for 3 years, and I took 3 gap years, and it was all research-based, and then eventually now I'm in medical school.
Great. Nathan?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nathan. I'm a second-year medical student at Weill Cornell College in New York City. I graduated from Kamehameha in 2014, and I grew up in Hawaii Kai. Waimanalo Ahupua'a. And so I graduated from undergrad in 2018. I took 2 gap years. I was doing, I graduated with a BA in economics and biology, and then I did some research at Pfizer for a couple years, and I started medical school last year. So definitely happy to answer any questions about like the med school application process.
Great. And Mihana?
Ma'ano ai me ke aloha ia'u ko he na hulu mamo like ole. It's wonderful to have you all on board tonight and to read and chat who's here and how much you've already accomplished in your lives. My name is Mehana Vaughn. I grew up here in Kilauea on the island of Kauai. I attended our local elementary school here, went away to high school on Oahu. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate and studied sociology and education, and came home as a public school teacher in the Hawaiian immersion and charter schools. I also spent a year abroad living in Africa and working with women's groups in Zimbabwe and Kenya. And then came home to work on Kauai and teach, and felt concerned about the environmental issues facing our island of Kauai and the land use and planning issues. And went back to school at Stanford for a PhD in interdisciplinary environmental resource management, fairly late in life, in my early 30s. I had all 3 of my children while I was doing my PhD work, and came home to Hawaii. I've been a professor at UH Manoa, the Natural Resource Management Department, since 2013. My main job is mom. I have 3 children. The oldest turned 13 last week, so that's a big deal, our son, and I have 2 daughters. And so we spend a lot of time at soccer games and in the ocean. And my ohana are lei makers, so you'll find me often gathering and making lei in spare time. Aloha.
Well, mahalo everyone for sharing that background. Hopefully that gives our audience some great insight into the diverse backgrounds you all have, and hopefully a wide array of perspectives you'll be able to provide on the questions asked tonight. And just a reminder, we already have some great questions lined up, but feel free to keep adding more to the Q&A box, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to all the questions. So for our first question, we're going to go to Nathan, and we're going to ask, how did you get your first research experience? Was it the result of a connection with faculty members? Did you reach out over email or encounter an advisor at a conference meeting or some other setting?
So I started with research kind of early, starting in high school a little bit. And I think kind of being in that environment, I think breaking the ice can be very difficult. And so in undergrad, my first research experience was by reaching out by email. And I think like doing cold call emails, just like emailing people you've never met, can be very scary, but it is a very common way of being able to find people. And especially doing research on labs like at different universities, it can give you a kind of an idea of what people are doing and what you might be interested in. And people tend to be very willing to talk. And at the very worst, they might not just respond to your email and you kind of move on to the next. But that was kind of the very early process, at least for kind of biomedical research.
Great. Mehana, do you have any insight from your early research experiences?
My first research experience was a 4th grade science project. We had to do science projects, and I was interested in cordage, and there weren't that many opportunities to learn about Hawaiian culture when I was a child, so you kind of had to make them. So I had a Doing Things Hawaiian Style or something book, and I taught myself how to make hau and different cordages from Ie, and I hung them on the back porch with the big potato sack, and I threw canned goods in it till they broke. And the hau didn't break, the mesh bag, the potato sack broke first. But that kind of got me hooked, and the research experiences I remember a lot are some of those earlier things, like looking at invasive clams and how much salinity they could live in because they were starting to fill up taro patch pipes here in Hanalei, as a middle school student, and trying to figure out how much of a risk that was and if salt water would kill them off as saltwater intrusion happened, things like that. But yeah, really a range of things that I think were driven a lot by interests and passions in my life at different times. A project in college on how African girls could have more access to schooling because I just spent a semester teaching in rural Africa and I was concerned about that. So very diverse research inspired by life interests and passions.
Great. Thomas, did you have any additional insight on how you kind of got your first research start?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I did not do a lot in high school as far as being involved outside of like a middle school science fair project that I had to do, and wasn't very excited about it at that point. Honestly, I think I, in a way, had an advantage going into college, getting involved with research because I really didn't know what I was doing. I think to Nathan's point about cold emailing professors, that's a great way to do it. I was even more clueless. I walked into the professor's office during office hours of a professor who I was taking a class with my freshman fall and just asked, do you have stuff that I could like do? And that turned into a small research project, which turned into a senior thesis, which has now turned into what hopefully will eventually be a dissertation. And I think at the end of the day, just talk to people is the best advice on a certain level. Most people are pretty friendly.
Great advice. Andy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's really true. If you show that you're excited about something, I think people are really willing to take you on and kind of, show you how to do it, because we've all been there. We've all been the one cold calling the other and cold emailing the other person. My first research probably started in my first year of undergrad, and it was more formal, kind of through an internship, which was a really nice way to kind of get introduced to the research process, because you were working. I did the SSRI program with the Department of Native Hawaiian Health, which was just their summer thing. But it was really cool because we got to work with a physician, kind of structure a research project, and then kind of get guided along, through the whole literature search, building a, working hypothesis, being able to then substantiate it with a study. So that's kind of how I got it. And then it kind of like built kind of a confidence that you could then go forward with. So that was kind of the route I took. But then it kind of made me more confident in being able to apply myself to different kinds of projects after that.
Great. Yeah, no, that's all sounds like fantastic advice regarding being open to a lot of ideas that might get you excited to keep pursuing your research, as well as being willing to put yourself out there and cold call, cold email at potential advisors and just let them know you're interested, and what's the worst that can happen. You just kind of maybe don't get a response and you carry on and you keep growing from it. Great. On to our next question, kind of tangential. I'm curious if there are any kind of general rules of thumb that people have for interacting and connecting with faculty, maybe expanding beyond just, and who might serve as potential advisors, maybe beyond just the average cold call. Like, do you potentially try to meet up with them on campus or at conferences you might be at where you might have mutual interests? Or coming from a current professor's perspective from Mehana, do you have any particular views or sense of what faculty prefer about how students typically approach them? And it's okay if there's no general rules of thumb. It'd be great to just get your intake as well, or input as well. We'll start off with Thomas this time.
Yeah, I think honestly, at the end of the day, it's kind of, everyone is different, right? You as the individual are different and the professors are different. If I'm to offer an actual concrete tidbit of advice, something I think I still do today is you always, start with the most formal kind of professor, doctor, whatever that you want, but it can get casual quickly. If they respond back just on a first name, then it can be hi Sam or hi whoever for the next one. And I think starting to get to know professors beyond just what they do, it's important obviously to understand, their research interests, what kind of things their labs do, but who they are as people is always important to know. And that kind of thing also is crucial to, developing the network beyond just, this is a person that I kind of know what they research, but also being able to say, oh, this is someone I could reach out to for advice, and things like jobs, research, just work generally, as well as other connections into the academic world.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, to echo a lot of that, I think that, well, I think I've gone kind of like many routes on this, one that's coming to mind is there was one professor that I really found fascinating. And I think that's something that meant a lot to her, was that I did read her work before going to talk to her. So like having kind of like a background knowledge of like, okay, what is she interested in and how does like my idea fit into this project? The person that I am thinking of is she did a lot of work with like Maori populations, and I was also, you know, interested in learning about the Native Hawaiian populations. So by, you know, kind of going forward, like Thomas said, with kind of not just academic interest, but like kind of like we were both looking at indigenous populations. And that was something hard to find at Dartmouth, right? Because it's like on the other side of the world. But it was like kind of a common ground that kind of helped me kind of, you know, put my foot forward while there were other people like trying to do research with her because she was kind of a newer professor. It kind of helped me like stand out a little. So yeah, I would say like really like kind of getting into their work with what they've published so far and then finding ways to kind of connect to that.
Great. Mihana?
Well, I would reiterate a few things others have said. I think Thomas was clear that you'll have lots of different kind of mentors in your life, and maybe being clear about what you're looking for and what you need. I would say meet with as many people as you can and just reach out. You're not going to find the perfect PhD advisor at the first stab, but just talking to people about your ideas and getting input. All of that is useful later, especially Hawaii is such a small place and a lot of networking begins with these early conversations. I would say also don't neglect your community organizations as mentors and research partners. I know one of the things I look for most as a faculty member in deciding if I'm going to take students is your ideas and your partnerships. I'm less interested in knowing how you're going to contribute to my research. And remember, we are people too, and we're working with you just as much as you're working with us. And I'm way more interested in, you know, hearing from a student that has an idea. And even better, if that idea, all the research I do at this point is mainly participatory, where that research is with a community group that has a real need and they're asking for that need to be addressed. And you all come from communities, you already work with organizations, bring those partnerships. If you have a project that you want to do, either because you care about it incredibly and you think it's going to advance the field, or because you're working with a group that's already really wants it done and you want to help them, that makes a huge difference. So I think taking time to develop your own ideas as much as you research those of the person that you're meeting with, I think that's really, really important. And yeah, makes a huge difference.
Nathan?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have too much to add. I would just say that like on top of like Andy mentioning of doing research of people that you're reaching out to and when you're meeting with them, also make sure you do some research if you do end up cold emailing, research beforehand and be able to show that you do know what they actually work on, that you're not just kind of doing these copy paste emails. Like make sure if you're reaching out to someone, you actually care about their work and would want to work in their lab if they do respond to you.
Can I add to that too? Like on my website, I have, you know, for prospective students, or a lot of people have information out there and they say, when you email, have these things, have references, so take time to check that out. But yeah, the personalizing, the not just the sense that, wow, this is one of 45 emails the student, you know, raced off at once. But just one last thing, email, don't be offended if people don't answer right away. Faculty members get 300 emails a day. Most of us don't have secretarial support or anything like that. So your email is likely to get missed. So it's okay to email again. Don't feel offended or worried. If anything, it shows that it's really important to you.
Oh, that's all great. Our next question is, we'll start, I guess, with Andy. Do you have a sense of what qualities make up a good mentor-mentee relationship, and what should mentees do to facilitate that relationship, and how often should they be trying to update their mentors?
Yeah, so after I graduated from Dartmouth, I went to the NIH, which was a really big change for me because I've never really been in kind of like a really research heavy environment. And my mentor there was this person named Lino. And we had I really enjoyed our like mentor-mentee relationship, I learned a lot from him. And I think the qualities that made it so great was kind of that he was challenging, but also encouraging. I think that kind of balance is like hard to strike. And it's something that kind of like made me grow as a person, because he kind of taught me, you know, like, don't settle for just having, I don't know, these questions, but be able to like shape them in a way that like motivates, I don't know, answer. So it was kind of like that, yeah, that nice balance of challenging and encouraging that I would say to strive for. It comes a lot with being kind of open with your mentor, telling them and being really honest with both yourself and that person about like where you are, where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then like how you can build on that. And then also as a mentee, like following through is like very important. Like, I think that's something that mentors really like kind of get scared about, especially in that kind of like research environment, is like helping somebody that like, you know, maybe isn't totally committed. And so just being able to follow through on whatever you say you will do is pretty important, I would say, to the relationship.
Yeah, that sounds like really sound advice. And for those who aren't familiar, NIH is the National Institute of Health as well. Yeah. And Nathan, do you have any views to share on that?
I think it can be hard to find a good mentor. I think lots of people are interested in doing it, but not necessarily everyone is the best at being a mentor. And I would say, like, listening to Mehana's answers, like, she seems like a really great mentor, someone who's invested in like the work and like your ideas is a sign of a good mentor, I think. And I think also going back to something Mehana and Andy had mentioned is like setting expectations for what the relationship will be like early on can make a big difference. And I think maybe setting out like you want to have FaceTime with them from time to time, be able to talk about what you're doing. That might be a good way to kind of set off the relationship and make sure that you don't kind of disappear into the lab, which I think in undergrad, a lot of times when you're first emailing, you're kind of doing new research, you can kind of get lost in the shuffle, and taking steps to make sure that doesn't happen can really change your lab experience, I think.
Mehana?
I just really agree with everything that's been said. I think in my own life, having mentors that see you as a person and are interested in learning from you as a person, I think that's been very foundational to me, and I try to carry that forward. I know for me, it's really helpful when mentees see themselves as responsible for our relationship. We both play a role, but that they take on, you know, any advisor. Me, for instance, I have 10 students at a time. So I really find it helpful when students, when we're clear at the beginning about expectations. If you're a student that knows you want to present at certain conferences, or you really want to get career advice, or to really lay out, I ask my students to lay out what they need from this experience and their time in the program. So then I'm more able to help them. And then I think tracking your own progress, having students who are on top of it with the forms and all of that, versus waiting for you to email them and say your form's due, especially at the graduate level, that just doesn't work. But I think also setting, emailing ahead of a meeting and saying, this is the agenda, this is what I want to accomplish, sending writing ahead so that there's time to read it, and helping to track, this is the advice you gave last time, this is how I inputted it this time. So you can see, and tracking those changes and sort of just drawing that thread of your progress throughout, and you keeping track of it so that your mentors can see and jump right in and really make the most of your time together. And I just being clear about what you need. I tell all my students at the end of a committee meeting, have a slide. This is what I need from you. This is how you can help me. And really laying that out for your mentors and advisors, I think, is important. And you can ask personal questions as well. Mentors are mentors in lots of ways, right? It's not just about your research, but maybe a lot of my students are interested in what it's like to juggle being a mom and a faculty member, for instance. And those are really important parts of mentorship in the stages of life that many of you are entering into as well.
Great. Yeah. And Thomas, any closing thoughts on developing good mentor-mentee relationships?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think everyone has made really good points so far. And if I can actually specifically echo something Mohammed just said about this idea of very concretely of, sending an email before a meeting and say, here's an outline of what I want to talk about. Follow that up too with an email afterwards and say, here's what I took away from this meeting. These are the things I'm going to do. That can never underestimate how helpful, or never overestimate how helpful that kind of thing is, just to keep everyone on the same page. And, to that line of thinking as well, I think anecdotally for me, one of the best things I've done to have a good relationship with my PhD advisor is just be extremely clear about what the heck I don't know. As soon as I have a stupid question, I ask the stupid question. Then there's no lost in translation, no time to be spent trying to figure out what's lost in translation or what you know or don't know, or trying to spend way too much time figuring out on your own. And I think the last thing, if I can kind of wrap up to something Nathan said about just choosing the right PhD advisor as well, talk to the grad students. Grad students, I think, generally have good insight into how a particular advisor might work, what the relationships are between other students in the lab, students to the advisor, the group as a whole. So, I would always reach out to the people that are going to be your peers as well.
Also, if I can just add a little bit, I would say, I feel like we kind of outlined a very ideal mentor-mentee relationship, especially, and what Andy was saying is make sure you follow through. I would say, honestly, there are times where I didn't follow through on things, and making sure you take ownership when that does happen is an important thing. I think mentors, and especially good mentors, will understand that you are a person, you have a life, and sometimes things will get in the way, but make sure that you try to minimize that as much as possible. It really shouldn't happen. But when it does, make sure that you're upfront and you try to take steps to resolve any issues that may have arisen from that.
Yeah, I mean,
to add to that, there's a question about when mentor-mentee relationships go awry, and they do. It's a work in progress, right? Things are not always perfect, and it requires constant adjustments. And that's why we kind of try to keep a mentoring plan of, this is what we both expect, how are we doing on this? But I think that in my experience, when things go awry, it's usually 3 reasons. One, unclear expectations and differing expectations. One is maybe lack of support when a student is really struggling in the rest of their life and doesn't have support in place. And when a mentor is sort of being a therapist, and that's hard to do for all students. And it's really not always the role or the appropriate role of your mentor. So I think just having that balance in life that your mentor is one part of, and you have lots of other sources of balance and support, is really important. And then just communication about these things, ongoing communication is vital.
Yeah, just to kind of continue that discussion Mehana got going, if anyone else feels open or comfortable sharing about occasions where mentor-mentee relationships might have hit some roadblocks or some hurdles that needed to be overcome, how you maybe address those issues, or maybe needed to move on from a mentor or mentee relationship for any particular reason. I think that could be valuable advice for kind of shedding light on the potential troubles that can arise through the process of developing networks, but hopefully your advice will help people to navigate it whenever they encounter it.
I can maybe speak a little to that. So in undergrad, I did research in kind of a biochemical lab. It was very, very basic research, and it was a good lab. And I stayed there all 4 years through undergrad, or 3.5. And at a certain point, though, I think the lab culture, which can be very variable from one lab to another, got a little bit tense and a little unsupportive. And it ended up happening that 3 of the grad students in the lab ended up leaving the lab, which is relatively rare to happen. They were a couple years into their program. And one of the PhD students who did end up leaving was the person that I was working with closely. So that kind of created a bit of tension. And I think at that point, recognizing when maybe the environment that you're in isn't the best environment for you to be in and the best for you to learn and grow, that's an important to be able to process and be aware of, and know when to say, I think this is time for me to leave. Because what I ended up doing was continuing to stay in the lab because I kind of felt guilty that I had gone this far and hadn't really done much work or shown much for the work that I did to put in. And so I continued to stay. And then it ended up where I kind of started to withdraw more and more, and I kind of disappeared from the lab for a little bit. And so at the end of the year, I kind of had to go back and apologize, and this is kind of where that ownership comes. And in this case, I'm not sure it really remedied anything, but I think it definitely helped kind of tie up some ends, or tie up loose ends between the two of like me and my research mentor. So things definitely can happen where things don't work out. And I think the earlier you can identify that maybe it's not a good fit for you, or when you start to identify that, to try and speak to your mentor earlier on, you can maybe try and prevent this from a similar event from happening. I will say in the end, like I was very stressed about it at the time and worried about it, but things do work out like in the long run, I think. So even when things go awry, like there's always a way to fix it or to move on from it.
Andy or Thomas?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Andy, no, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of to echo Nathan, I think taking responsibility for things that maybe don't go like as planned is really important. I can think of a time where, like Nathan said, again, like a lot of labs are really different. I think I've seen maybe 3 or 4 at this point, and they all have kind of their own personalities, which is kind of fun. And you see where you kind of like fit in and what your lab personality is. But I would say that like there were times where I like clashed a little bit with, there's one that's coming to mind where I clashed, and then the thing that made it work in the end was just kind of communicating that, because at first I was kind of like new to the lab, so I felt like I didn't really maybe have like a say in like how this was going, or like maybe this is how it was, and like I was just gonna have to like deal with it and like work on it. But I think like then going to other people in the lab for support, or also like just trying to communicate with that person that I wasn't really, I guess, vibing with at the beginning, made our relationship like a lot better. Cause like, while I could say, maybe I had to be honest and be like, hi, sorry, I don't actually understand like how to do this protocol. Can I please like watch you, and like be really willing to like learn, I think, and show that you're willing to learn from your mistakes. And I think that's what kind of helps mend stuff like that.
Thomas, any final thoughts on that, or we can move on to another question?
I can just add, I think we've talked a lot about, good relationships, when things start going awry, how catching in the bud can fix these kinds of things. I think when things start feeling like they're spiraling out of control, I think it's also important. I've been very lucky to have, bumps along the road, but a fairly good relationship with my advisor. But anecdotally, within the department, there have been cases where you need some kind of intervention, either from department administration or outside parts of the school. But so it's important you also know that you also have other avenues for recourse as well. So you don't feel like you're kind of stuck with these kinds of things. Even other faculty that you're friendly with that aren't your direct advisor might be very helpful for those kinds of situations as well. So that's just something to keep in mind too.
If I could just add, don't go it alone. Like research can be really lonely, but the more you're connected to other students, whether in the same lab or other, and you can talk about things, and like Andy said, share and share the frustrations, share the struggles. But I think, to Nathan and Thomas's points, it's important to be aware too, and know that there are mentor relationships that are abusive, and that could be because in medical fields, it's long hours and you have stressed out residents and they might be asking too much of the students under them. It can also be that, really that professors are putting too much workload on you. That's not fair. And, but unfortunately in the STEM fields, there has been quite a history of abuse that I think we've come a long way. But unfortunately, it is still around, and people do experience people abusing their position of power that comes with being a mentor. So, be aware of that as well, be vigilant to that, and just really know it's not okay. And it has nothing to do with you if you're in that situation. And it's important to have support in calling it out and getting out of that situation.
Those are really great reminders about being aware and finding support, from knowing where you have support, both at the university level as well as among your peers and other faculty. And yeah, definitely recognizing that it's not best to go try to handle it all on your own, especially in a really challenging situation with a power dynamic element to it as well. Our next question, I see some folks have been starting to type some responses to the Q&As, but we'll take our next question from the Q&A box. And I want to encourage people to keep posting questions in there, especially questions that are seem broadly relevant regarding network development. And we'll try to get to those, and others that seem more specific, we'll try to respond in the chat. But our next question, we'll start with Thomas, if that's okay. And it's kind of related to a lot of undergraduate classes will be pretty large, and it can be kind of daunting to connect with a professor. Do you think it still is worthwhile if you're interested in a professor's research? How do you go about approaching that? And I think that could be really useful advice.
I think it depends obviously on the class itself and the professor. I think I'm going to preface almost everything I say with that. There are no monolithic solutions in these kinds of things, but I think generally, if I can make any kind of a broad statement, is that professors, graduate students, postdocs, we're all pretty lonely in our office hours. Go to office hours and talk to people. That's all I've got.
Yeah. Andy?
Sorry, I kind of said my little tidbit in the chat, but I would say that the size of the class shouldn't deter you, especially if you are interested in the course or in the professor, because making the connections in the long run, like if you do build a relationship in the long run, it can help you with letters of recommendation, research opportunities, or even just in the course. Like, you might, like Thomas said, like I've been to office hours and like they're not always filled, and like professors will notice if you come, especially if you have like an interest in being there and are there to like learn. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Hannah? No, and Nathan, any final thoughts on that? Or it's okay if not.
Sorry, I might have missed the question. I was trying to answer another one.
No problem at all. Thanks for juggling. I know it's hard. I appreciate you trying to attend to all the questions in the Q&A. It just was, if you had any final thoughts about approaching professors, especially in like a larger classroom setting. But I think we've touched on a lot of stuff, office hours being like a main avenue, but if you have any other additional sort of suggestions, confidence boosters.
In this day and age, turn on your screen in Zoom. You would be amazed how often we lecture to like all these blank screens. Those 5 faces out of 120 that are there every week, you will be seen. But definitely, I mean, often, like Andy said, we have empty office hours, and yeah, I just don't be afraid. Just go for it. I'd love to hear people's answers to Ethan's question. I don't know if that's where you're headed next. What was it like?
Yeah, go ahead, Hannah. I think it just kind of disappeared. But
oh, I saw, what was it like coming from Hawaii public schools and entering into schools such as Harvard and Stanford? Did people receive scholarships? If so, what was the process like? I mean, I'd love to hear from others. I think just going from Hawaii to college is an adjustment. Many of us come from high schools that prepare us and push us in that direction, but many of us don't. Also, many of us are the first in our families to go to college, or the first from our high schools to go to these colleges. Or so I think it's different from everyone, but I think it's a shock. In my case, I knew I wanted to go as far away as possible from home so that I could come back, because I always knew I would come back. And if you take anything from this panel, please take this: come home, come home. There are jobs for you. There are programs from you. We need you all. Come back to Hawaii. But for me, it was only possible with lots of scholarship and financial aid. Kamehameha Schools was very generous and supported me all the way. And a requirement of that was I had to do community service every summer. In those days, Kamehameha School scholarships, I don't know if it's still this way, but we had to give back hours. And so those experiences were some of the most formative to what I do now in terms of partnerships and in terms of people I met and networks, was that volunteer work that was required by my scholarships. And I think Andy said earlier, being from Hawaii, it gives you strength, it gives you direction, it gives you a sense of who you are, that sometimes takes a lot of time to figure out and navigate, but it's there. So even though you're far from home, you often have a clear sense of where home is and that you have responsibility there. And don't underestimate the power of that. That's really important.
that was a really great response. Yeah, and I liked what you had to say regarding, I mean, luckily, I just advice of almost finding ways to appreciate rather than be bummed out, as some people might be initially about certain scholarships requiring you to give back. Try to be genuine in that effort to give back when you're required to do hours for a scholarship or other reason, and you'll be surprised with like the networks you can develop and through that effort. Andy, do you have anything to add about?
Yeah, I went to Dartmouth, and it was in New Hampshire, very far away. So it did feel like Thomas said, a culture shock. I did get need-based scholarship. I think that a lot of those big, like old schools do give out need-based where it applies. And I think that, like Mehana just said, being from Hawaii, it takes a long time or for me, it took a long time to navigate like what that meant, because when I left, it was like hard to be indigenous or native in like a school that was very like elite and very like upper class white. But it kind of like almost challenges you to, I guess, make a space in that environment for yourself and for like your learning. So for example, for me, like I was really interested in neuroscience, but at the same time, I was trying to find ways to stay rooted in the Native Hawaiian culture. And then that just helped me kind of like find a confidence to then go ahead and pursue historical trauma research, which I found really, really interesting and helped me kind of develop as an indigenous researcher. So just like, yeah, not being like sad, like Nakoa said or whatever, but just like kind of embracing the opportunity that you have to be away and to like learn to bring back to your people, hopefully. But yeah.
Thomas, you want to share anything more on your perspective going to the East Coast?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at least for me, coming out of Hilo, small town, the Big Island, not, Honolulu is the big city as far as I'm concerned. Then to go to the East Coast and to Boston and to be surrounded by people that seem like geniuses and, all of this stuff. At the end of the day, I think the biggest thing I took away was that no place is perfect, but there are things we can learn from almost every place. Hawaii is pretty darn close as far as, as good places go. But I think there's great value in going other places, seeing what they have to offer, what's good and what's bad. And that gives really valuable perspective that can then be reflected back, talking, to kind of continue and pull on this vein of giving back and bringing new perspectives, new ideas, and making Hawaii a better place, right? And then I think it goes without saying, it's a place that all of us care pretty deeply about.
I can add one more thing. In med school, we just talked about kind of like imposter syndrome. And I think that that's something that a lot of kids from Hawaii that then go to the mainland might deal with. Kind of like the feeling, if you don't know what that is, just like the feeling of like, why am I here? And I think I felt like that a lot when I went away. Like Thomas said, like you're kind of in the midst of all these people that you're like, wow, you guys are so smart. But like, just know that like, you're also smart and you like made it there and like you have something individual and interesting to contribute to that place. Wherever that place is, like your presence there is important and valuable.
Nathan, do you want to share about your experience going to the East Coast?
I would echo a lot of what has already been said, that there is, at least for me, there was a huge adjustment. And I feel like in high school, I thought I was well prepared, and then you kind of get to these other spaces and you might be well prepared, but so is everyone else. And that's it's like adjusting to that kind of environment is very different. I would also say that like, if you do end up leaving Hawaii, like make sure you take advantage of getting to know people like from all over. Like that was one of the best experiences of kind of leaving home. Like you really learn so much about like the world in general, and you really start to change your own worldviews about how things work, how they maybe should work, how they shouldn't work. And also don't be afraid to share your own experiences. And because as much as you're learning from other people want to learn from you. And I think growing up in Hawaii, being from Hawaii, like you have, and many Native communities, I would say more generally, like you have a lot to contribute. And people should hear these stories and these experiences.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in one last time, but to that point Nathan just made, I think one other very valuable thing that we've kind of been getting at the edges of in this conversation is this idea of being yourself as well, right? I think a lot of people coming into these classes, their defining feature, their life goal through all of high school is to get into one of these places, to have the high grades, to have the extracurriculars, have whatever have you. And then you get there and you realize, wait, everyone has this. Everyone's like a genius and did 37 extracurriculars in high school. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of lean into yourself and say, okay, well, what actually really makes me me, aside from all those things, right? To focus on who you are rather than being you as a student, being you as you.
Two other quick things. Let people take you home. Some of my best experiences were like Thanksgivings in Connecticut, Kansas, whatever, or me and the African students hanging out in the dorms because we're the only ones who couldn't go home. But have those experiences. Don't just hang out with the Hawaii kids. But also remember that how much you talk is not an indication of how smart you are. Because I remember my PhD program feeling like, I am never going to get a word in edgewise here. I have nothing to say. What am I doing? But that's not the point. It's just that culturally in Hawaii, we communicate a bit differently, and it's okay.
Well, these are all really good insights and kind of reminders for people thinking about going far away. And I think it's a really valuable perspective that seems to be common to a lot of folks here, that seeing value in experiencing a new place and learning and bringing that knowledge back home, echoing what Mehana and others have said, to make Hawaii a better place. And I see a question in the Q&A about going over the process, the key points of PhD program applications besides networking with faculty members and mentors. I don't know how that we have the time or kind of purpose of this event for that, but I would recommend some other programming that we have through Honua Scholars, advertised on honuascholars.org. We have IMUA sessions every month, the next one being tomorrow, actually at 5 p.m. Hawaii time. So feel free to jump on that Zoom link, and we can definitely have mentors there to give you some effectively one-on-one office hours time to go through some of those key things you might want to think about when applying to graduate school. Thank you all for the questions so far, and we have 10 more minutes to keep asking more questions in the Q&A if you have. We just got one. Okay, this one's a little bit more general maybe. What are some things that you highly recommend to do or prepare for graduate school, and or some things that you regret not doing or having done or in preparation for graduate school? We'll start with Nathan.
I think so. I definitely have a bias because this is kind of what I did, and I'm happy that I did it. But definitely, at least for medical school, like taking some time off from undergrad, I think is very valuable for like so many reasons. For one, if you feel like you're maybe like in some ways like your GPA isn't super high or something like that, and you're kind of worried about that, not that that's the only thing that matters for medical school applications at all, but if you are worried about it, having a gap year gives you some time to like add to your experience pool, and you're able to talk about kind of something that you're very passionate about and spent years focusing on. And I think that's definitely valuable. And perhaps even more valuable, it really gives you perspective to be outside of school for a little bit and to kind of make that decision to go back to school. I think it's a very different kind of way of living after you've not been a student for a little while. And it gives you, I think, hopefully more focus, and you can also be more sure of the choice that you're making, particularly for medical school, because it can be very difficult and very strenuous. And I think at times you will question it. And I think if you've had that time and that perspective, when you are questioning it, you know that it is something that you are dedicated to.
Mehana, any recommendations for people preparing to go to grad school?
Maybe just pushing myself out of my comfort zone a little more. I think in my PhD, I had 3 children. I just wanted to go home to my husband on Kauai. So it was sort of like try to get in and out, but I think that your graduate school time, your undergraduate school time is precious, and it's yours to make whatever you want of it. So don't be stressed if you're the one undergrad who shows up and doesn't know what your major is going to be freshman year. I remember the president of Harvard gave us a speech the first week and he said, try new things. You think you know what you're going to do, throw it out of the door for at least the first semester. But I think that thing of it's a rare opportunity to take an incredible class that has nothing to do with anything you've ever known about. And I think in my PhD, I wish I pushed a little more into skills that were a little more overwhelming, a little scary, a little further out of my comfort zone. Because when you're in school, it's just a great time to do that. So that would be it.
Thomas?
Yeah, sure. So to kind of echo that point, I think one thing even within graduate school that it's taken me some time in my program to realize, but I'm fully trying to lean into now, is that a PhD program is one of the few times where you're going to be able to really lean into and just absolutely wholeheartedly pursue whatever you want to research, whatever just grabs hold of your curiosity. Then I'm sure Mehana could speak to this much better than I could, but then there are these there's the issue of getting funding, there's the issue of paperwork and all the other day-to-day operations of research. And being a PhD student is one of the best times to just grab whatever you want to work on by the horns and dive into it without having to worry about a lot of that stuff.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm kind of biased like Nathan too. I took 3 gap years and I think they really paid off, not just from like a experience standpoint, but also from like kind of like a mental wellness standpoint. Going straight through would have been really hard for me. I know people do it and people really excel doing it, but taking a break was nice. Kind of, you're going to be doing medicine for the rest of your life once you finish. So being able to kind of like dip your feet into other things, I found really valuable. So like I came home and did some work with the community organizations, like Mehana was saying, like went out to model farms and stuff like that. So it was like really cool, like things that maybe won't end up happening for me in the future, because like I have picked a profession that's very, like from now on, I'm probably gonna be a doctor. So just having that time to like kind of explore and like do other things that still benefit you as like a candidate, or like kind of like helps you build perspective. It doesn't even have to be research. But yeah, so I think somebody asked like, how important is it to do research? I personally did a lot of research just because that's kind of like what drew me in. But I know a lot of people who did like really awesome, like random things that have made them stand out to the application panel that are like, or admissions panel. And yeah, so I would definitely say like something that I enjoyed doing was taking time, learning about like myself as like just a learner, and like how I can do best.
Nice.
So if I can add quickly, I did write this in the Q&A, but for people who are applying to medical school, I think a really, really important thing to do, and it's really not just like, I feel like sometimes it feels like you're just checking things off a list of things you're supposed to do to get into med school. But one really important thing is to have clinical experience, so like to volunteer in a hospital or to work in a doctor's office, to shadow someone, so you actually know what you're getting yourself into, because it is a hard career to do. There's a lot of training and a lot of like very long hours. So knowing that beforehand makes a big difference, not only for your application, because schools want to know that you know what you're doing, or what you're getting yourself into, but it's also good for you to know that this is what you want to do, because that will keep you driven throughout the training process.
Actually, I would like to emphasize that, because I am somebody who didn't do that. And that is something that I regretted. I did not take the time to do the clinical stuff because I was kind of invested in my research. And if I had taken the time to like go and see kind of like what the different practices were, I think I would have had kind of like a much better approach to medical school, because I kind of came in here with like a research background, like not really knowing, like how it is to be a doctor, what they do. So yeah, going to like just shadow people, or even volunteering at the hospital, anything you can do to kind of just like immerse yourself in that field is really awesome.
This is a very practical thing. If you are looking for a gap year position, a very common one is to like scribe as in a doctor's office. And I think you should probably do more than just scribing in your gap year, but like it is a very valuable experience, and you get very practical skills for like your future in medicine. Like you really learn how to write notes, which is like a big thing that you will encounter in medical school.
Yeah, this is all really great advice about and showing the different perspectives on going right through undergrad to grad school versus taking time off. There's plenty of examples right in front of you tonight showing that there's plenty of paths, and you don't need to just stay on the conveyor belt through the education system. You can step away and come back, but really valuing that at time in school, like Mihana said, that you have. It's a time I can imagine that it just is unlike anything you'll have for the rest of your life. I mean, hopefully you can take a lifetime learner role, but can be a great time to learn as a graduate student. We're kind of running up on the clock. I don't know if we want to do one last simple question and people can give short responses, but this question is, what is the most valuable thing you gained from a mentor or a mentorship relationship? It's kind of hopefully a nice question to reflect on some ways you've benefited from. I mean, I guess you've all had many mentors, but a few things that stand out as things you've taken away that really have affected your view on how you approach life and your career. We'll start with Thomas.
So I think this actually is to kind of rehash a point that was made earlier about just being away from Hawaii generally. But I think one of the best things I got out of my advisor and student relationship is just getting to feel like I'm part of an academic family as well. My advisor is a wonderful person that opens up her home for Thanksgiving to her lab and stuff like that. Especially when you can't go home, always feels nice. I'm very lucky to have a good lab vibe where it does feel like a family. So for me, at least, I think that's one great thing I've gotten out of that relationship.
Andy?
I think that one thing that I got out, my mentor from Dartmouth, she was a woman in science, really encouraging in that way. I think seeing people who you find to be role models or like are doing work that you find really interesting or impactful, and seeing that they can do it, and and then like asking them about their experiences and like what they think is important. I think that was like really helpful to me to help find like confidence in myself to like then be, somebody who can also like do something to, be a role model to somebody in the future.
Nathan?
Well, one of my very first mentors, I think, is on the call now. She had introduced herself at the beginning. Just a shout out. And I think that is like being able to stay in contact really does mean a lot for both you and the mentor. And I know I can do better, Miss Ish. But also I would say, I think outside of kind of longevity, I think just having someone who's invested in you kind of really validates your own like experience as like a human person. And I think like that has been like one of the more valuable things I've gotten out of mentorship relationships. And that's why I think it's very important to seek them out, because it can help you a lot in finding what you want to do in life and what your passions are.
Mihana?
I think I'm going to try to direct my answers to some of those last questions about networking and making connections. I think these are important. From Peter Vitusik at Stanford, I learned collect quality information and check your sources, because you will be trusted for that. From Anakala Eddie Ka'anana in the Lo'i at Anwenue School, Puna, I learned makahana ka'ike. What you do is more important than what you say. And take time to work with your hands, take time to work with unity, take time to touch aina. That's valuable in who you are and your learning. From Punani Burgess, I learned that you'll meet who you go to meet with. So if you go to meet with someone's fancy label, that's who will come to you. But if you go to meet with a person who, like you, has many hats, is a a grandniece and a, you know, an auntie and a brother and a coach and struggling to figure out something and balancing, you know, that's the person, a human, that's who will come to meet with you. And that's the level at which you connect and build connections that last lifetimes and that you can extend to others. And lastly, from Nililani Trasmati, who was a undergrad when I was at Stanford, who's now a doctor herself, what a joy mentoring is. And she told us once, always take somebody younger with you. And she was all of 18 at the time. So you are all of you on this presentation tonight are mentors, all of you participants. And don't forget that and know how incredibly rewarding and what a gift it is. And do teach and do mentor someone younger than you always.
Well, thank you all for those closing remarks about all that you've gained from your mentorship relationships, and for taking on roles, like Mehana said, as mentors tonight, by providing advice to all our audience. And with that, we'll kind of wrap up our Pilina panel. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us. Some of you staying up late on the East Coast, we really appreciate it. And Kyle, thank you for, Kyle Yoshida just shared our links to social media and our website. Again, I just want to remind you, we have opportunities with mentorship and in what we call Inua sessions. They're kind of like our office hours offered by our organization. So you can drop by with more questions. Mahalo to everyone, all the audience who attended tonight as well and asked so many great questions of these panelists. And with that, we'll kind of close and ahui ho.